Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I am good, man. And you?
Not too bad. uh,
Good, good.
yeah. Well, Chuck, I guess we can get started. So where are you calling from?
I am in Fleming Island, Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, just outside of
Okay.
Jacksonville. So,
Okay.
where are you?
I'm in California, out of
Okay,
Chico. Yeah, just moved here from New York.
okay. Well, it's
Yeah.
early for you then, right?
Yeah, it's about six. It's about
Yeah,
I guess 6 a.m. now.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You should have called me. We could have pushed it a little bit for you.
Yeah, I have stuff later too, so
Okay,
this is like a good time for me to do it every day.
okay, good, good.
Uh,
So now, tell me your background really quick.
Sure. So, um, grew up in the church. I've done missions, went to Bible college, seminary. I've worked in a couple churches, and this past year I've been doing missions in New York City. I've recently switched to doing missions here in California, working with YWAM. Uh,
Okay,
I My profession outside of just ministry is working with technology, uh, doing marketing and communications. So that's what I've been doing in missions.
okay. Well, yeah, I probably need to spend some more time with you then.
All right.
I I've got my hands in a couple of nonprofits and some stuff that we've started,
Yeah.
um, but we've been in a season of transition just personally,
Mm.
and and so I need to really start marketing and doing some stuff with my couple of nonprofits that I have.
Okay. Yeah. I can answer questions if you have them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, um, just to like give us a format, I was thinking we can talk about like the calling of where like what you did, how you got started, and then build
Okay,
into your ministries beyond the pulpit, and then from there go into lessons learned. Um,
is that better or worse?
I don't know. Uh, oh, lighting.
Yeah.
I think it's on. Yeah.
Okay, we'll leave it on.
All right.
Yeah, I'm set up in my office and I've got a big glass behind me,
Yeah.
and it's depending on what the sun does. So
No worries. It's audio first, video second. So
okay,
yeah.
all right, yeah, yeah. So we'll. I'm ready. I am ready whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, so did you grow up in a church?
I did. I did. I grew up um, in a independent Baptist church, and so that's some of my background. But when uh, my parents were very good about making sure that we were in church. I have two siblings, and so I was raised in a Christian home, raised
Mm.
attending church. But like a lot of folks, when I got into my late teens, early 20s, I very much wandered away from that. So
Okay.
then my wife and I met, started dating this girl. She later became my wife. But went through a failed experience in college,
Mm.
and uh, something something about alcohol and horses in a dorm room. They didn't exactly get excited about that at the college I was at, and so uh, I was asked to not come back to that college, and so I
Mhm.
found myself really sort of in a, I joke about it, but I was in a downhill spiral. So I went to work in a career field, and while I was in sort of the beginning stages of that career field, I had a guy come alongside me. Uh, at the time, I thought, man, this guy, he's just a friend. And he
Yeah.
was, but it was very much more than that. It was very much this guy came along beside me, began to disciple me, began to invest in me. Um, and then I took a job transfer. I was married at this point. My first child was on the way, and went to another city. And my neighbor was like, "Hey, man, where you go to church?" I'm like, "Well, man, we just moved here." And he's like, "Well, I'm gonna like you got to be in church." And
Mm.
so God had just put some really good people in my life. And so after being in a career uh, for a decade, um,
What was your
uh,
career?
I was working with CSX Transportation. It's a large rail company here on the East Coast,
Okay.
and so I found a lot of success um, there, and
Mm.
so I was in the management, upper management side of things, and so anyway, after 10 years there, the church that I was involved in said, "Hey, man, we see a calling on your life, and so we want to pay for you to go to seminary and really get your education." And so I walked away from a 10-year, very lucrative career uh, to go be a youth pastor and make no money at all.
Yeah,
It's been a wild journey since then. So
that's awesome.
yeah,
I so your church like paid for your seminary?
yeah. What was so crazy about that whole story is it was a church plant. It was a new church start, and the church was doing well within a
Mhm.
couple of years, running several hundred people, and so we were actually talking about me making the transition from my career to going and serving in that church full
Mm.
time. And in full transparency,
Mm.
I look back on that and I'm like, I'm torn between, man, I value my seminary degree so much,
Mhm.
but I look back and it's like, man, I had the opportunity to be discipled and to be invested in one on one by my pastor there.
Mhm.
And that church continued to grow. He was not only a great spiritual leader. He was a great pastor, but he was a great business guy as well. And so he
Mhm.
understood the nuances of both what pastoral ministry meant and what leading a thriving church meant. And
Okay.
so they offered to pay for my, yeah, and they paid 100% of it. And I was married with a child at that time. And so they had no requirements of me ever coming back to the church to serve. They had no, like, we want to bless you. We want to be a part of this. And so, yeah, so they paid for it and off we went.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. True spirit of generosity, really.
I think we could use some more churches like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Great church.
Hmm. So, so you finished seminary. Where'd you go from there?
So while I was in seminary,
Hmm.
um, I served as a youth pastor and kind
Okay.
of did both of those things simultaneously for several years. But I'd been in the corporate world for 10 years. And so my pastor, where I was a youth pastor at, was very, very gracious to me because I had come out of a corporate environment and making that transition from corporate world to student ministry full time was quite the transition. And he was very, very gracious to me. I was very structured in my approach to youth ministry. And for any of you guys that are listening that have been in youth ministry, structure is not a priority in most
Yeah.
youth ministries. And so but the ministry grew. It did very well, and so I was there for about 4 years, and then we left from there and moved to the. This was in Atlanta,
Oh,
and so we moved south of Atlanta, on the south side of Atlanta, and because the church plant, the new church start, had such an impression on me. We had went to that church. Those are the ones who paid for my seminary. It's called Grace Community Church, and
okay.
has such a profound impact on my life. I was like, man, we want to duplicate that. We want to,
Yeah.
we want to start a church that's not. And there's nothing wrong with tradition. I think we need that to a large degree. I
Hmm.
sometimes think we get more focused on the traditions than we do in reaching people. And so for listeners, I mean, that's sort of a bend of where I head is, man, I'm more concerned. Excuse me. I'm more concerned about reaching people with the gospel than holding on to just traditions to hold on to traditions. And some of those are valuable. Some traditions are valuable, um, but they're a tradition for a reason. But so we said we wanted to come alongside the traditional church, and we wanted to start a church that was reaching unchurched people,
Okay.
and we did, and and it was an exciting ministry,
Hmm.
and man, we saw, gosh, uh, we saw a lot of people come to Christ, lots of
Yeah.
baptisms, lots of discipleship opportunities.
Hmm.
But when you set out to intentionally reach the unreached, you're reaching people who, and especially in the South, it's a little bit of a rarity to
Hmm.
find people who don't have any church background.
Okay.
Most people have some church background. And if I can just be a little crass for a moment, a
Yeah.
lot of the reasons folks in the South don't attend church is because they've been to one and they're like, I'm out.
Hmm.
And so those were the kind of people that we were reaching, and we reached hundreds and hundreds of them.
Wow.
And so it was a tremendously fun, exhausting ministry.
How long would you say the church was in the planting stage?
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation because obviously, if you've been around church planting and new church starts, those pastors tend to flock together, generate ideas from one another.
Hmm.
Um, and so, a conversation that I still have with guys is, how long do you consider yourself a church plant? Because at
Yeah.
some point, you're not an infant anymore. Like, you were born, but you don't remain an infant. At some point, you become an adult. And so, like, where's that transition from a church? Like, you're always going to be a church that's planted, but at what point do you become an adult? And so for us, that was really, honestly, probably around year 4 or 5. We sort of
Okay.
really began to settle in and be like, okay, this is who we are. We've kind of figured out who we are. We figured out what our struggles are. We figured out what our strengths are,
Yeah.
and this is kind of, we kind of figured it out. You know, we didn't figure
Oh,
it out. We figured out who we were.
yeah.
And so it was a tremendously fun ministry.
Okay. Uh, did you guys go through an organization or was it through a church?
We did. And so we went through an organization. We, like I said earlier, I come from a Baptist background,
Right.
and we went. The church plant originally started as a Georgia Baptist church plant, Southern Baptist, and
Okay.
no shade on them. But what we figured out uh, fairly quickly was they were sort of just jumping into this church planting game. This was back in the early 2000s, and I know most of your viewers probably are looking at me going, "Man, this dude's in his 20s. How's that possible?" But I'm not. And so we planted a church in the early 2000s. Uh, and so after a decade of corporate work, and then we planted a church. they were just beginning into this church planting, kind of really jumping in, uh, and uh, and so I had no clue how to plant a church. The people who come alongside us were people from our community who had a desire to reach unchurched people. So they had no idea how to plant a church. And so we were
Yeah.
heavily dependent on an organization that was just sort of getting their feet. Now, the Georgia Baptists obviously have been around for 100 plus years, but their church planting program had recently gotten started. And so we actually sort of made a transition uh, somewhere around 2006, 2007, over to ARC, to Church of the Highlands, to the Grow Leader
Okay.
conference. And so we actually, we were not an ARC church plant, but we were part of the Grow Leader system. And that's one of the things that really helped us get our footing and really figure out who we were. And that really kind of helped jumpstart the whole thing.
Yeah. Um, for your church plant, did you guys end up or you had a team, I'm guessing, and did you end up raising funds for this?
So let me tell you, if
Yeah.
anybody wants to contact us and say, hey, Pastor Chuck, can you tell us how to not plant a church? Tell us what you did, and I can tell
Yeah.
you what not to do. Everything that
Okay.
we did, you should not do. So my wife and I had a desire in our heart to reach these people,
Mm-hmm.
and so again, it was our background that drove us. And so the church that I served in as a youth pastor, and again, my pastor was so gracious to me, but it was a traditional church, and they would just seemingly get frustrated with us because we were bringing in kids that, if you will, had no business being in church, and it's
Yeah.
like, no, this is exactly where they need to be.
Right.
And so we said, man, we want to reach a church for these unchurched people. And so my wife and I had a passion and no clue. And so the first organization we went with was like, yeah, you need to raise some funds,
Mhm.
and but there was no resources to do that, to help us figure that out. So I literally went door to door. I went to churches. I went to organizations. I went
Mhm.
to individuals and just said, "Hey, here's our vision. We want to
Mhm.
reach people who don't go to church." And so, ironically, we had a lot of traditional churches say, "We want to support that," because some of our church members probably wouldn't want those people coming here, but they need to be somewhere. And so it was crazy. We actually had most of our support um, came from existing churches who saw our vision. And so we raised money, but we didn't raise money up front to start the thing. We started the thing, and then it's like, man, we got to fund this thing somehow. And so then we kind of started raising money along the way after the thing had already started. And so the analogy we really tried to build the airplane after we'd already gotten it off the ground.
Mhm.
And so there was a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
We did not have a team. We did not start with a team. I would
Right.
highly recommend anybody who wants to plant a church find a great organization. I would give a shout out to ARC, um, but find a great organization. Raise more money than you think you need to raise, and build a
Mhm.
bigger team than you think you need to build. And here's what I have learned over my years of ministry:
Yeah.
if you can't raise the money and you can't build a team, you're probably going to really struggle starting a church.
Mm.
And so those are not. It's not about the money, and it's not about how many people that you have, but it's about the ability for you as a leader to build. And so those are really good indicators of how good of a builder you are. And so, and again, no shade against someone who can't do that. God hasn't wired you that way, and that's okay. Join an existing church somewhere and come alongside them. It's probably the better. So it was church planting is a challenge, but it's fun.
Yeah. Those are
So
some good notes to keep in mind.
yeah. We after our season there, I went back to seminary again
Oh
to
yeah,
finish up a degree, and
your
then after
master's.
that, yeah, I did. I finished up a master's in missiology, and then we went back to Georgia to do an intentional revitalization of a church, and so um, there is a vast difference in giving birth to something and resurrecting something from the dead. And so it is, as challenging as church planting is, it is much easier to give birth. Raising something from the dead is excruciatingly painful.
Mm-hmm.
So equally as fun if you
Yeah.
like pain, I guess. But it was a challenge. It was a lot of fun though. And so we turned the church around. That was primarily wonderful, sweet people. Gosh, they were great people. And so we see
And
a lot of churches. I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm sorry. Oh, so where was the revitalization?
It was in Middle Georgia,
Okay.
and it's an area in Macon, Warner Robins, large military town. Um, and so sweet people. Most all of the people were well over the age of 70 when I went there, and mainly a white Caucasian, typical church in the South.
Mm-hmm.
So very much a segregated population, and so we went there with the intent of turning it around, and we did, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of challenges because a lot of churches will say we want to reach a younger generation. Well, you can't do what you've always done and expect to reach different people.
Right.
And so you have to change what you're doing. Um, and I think probably the number one challenge with the Church of North America today is we've settled in on what we do works. And I really think that what God settles in on is he wants to keep I don't think God wants us to get caught up in a rut of doing the same thing, because now we get dependent on ourselves.
Right.
And so I think God is changing the game, if you will, for us and how we reach people, because he's very much as concerned about us staying on our edge of him as it is just about reaching people.
Okay.
And so I think that there's a great work that God wants to do in the church member as much as he wants to reach the lost people. And so, and when we see that with the Israelites, right, all throughout Scripture, we
Yeah.
see that with the New Testament churches, and so you're always having something new come in, as Paul's writing to the church at Corinth. It's like, here's all these challenges because we, the new Christians, come in and now we have challenges and we have figured out how to overcome our challenges, if you will. But what we do is we just create new challenges for ourselves. And the Holy
Okay.
Spirit is like, no, I want you to pin it on me, not on yourself. And so that was sort of the roller coaster that we took the church through of how do we not become so dependent. How do we take your experience and what you've done in church? How do we take your experience, your longevity in walking with Christ all these years? And how do we take that and how do we use you, the church member, the Christian who's been
Yeah.
here for, I remember, Elliott, when I started at the church, I had an older gentleman come up to me and he shook my hand very firmly and he put his other hand on my shoulder. If you can kind of get that in, he's like, he's shaking my hand and he's pulling me in and he's looking me right in the eyes. And he says, Pastor, I want you to know that I joined this church on this particular date and I'm not going anywhere. And I said, well, that's awesome. Well, the date that he told me actually was my birthday. Like it was my birthday. So
Yeah.
he had been at the church at that point, like 40 something years. And, and so, it was like, and so I remember the date because it was my birthday, July
Yeah.
13th, 1973. That's the day that he joined the church. And I remember the day that it's heartbreaking. I remember the day that he sends me a letter, uh, and has it put on my desk that they are leaving the church. And man, it was so heartbreaking. But he was leaving the church because the church had changed, and the things that they were accustomed to and the things that they valued wasn't there anymore. And I'll tell you, it is heartbreaking because you don't want to lose those people. And at some point, the leaders today have to make a choice, and I think it's an improper choice. But we're faced with this choice of, do we keep existing church members or do we reach new people? And I do think that for most people, there is a balance to be had there. And I think that balance comes with teaching what Jesus taught us in discipleship. And he said, come follow me. I will make you fishers of men. And so we tend to not focus on the, we want, hey, come follow me. And we want the fishers of men, but it's the part in the middle that Jesus focused most of his time on. I will make you. And that's the investment part. And so if we can invest in the people that are in our churches, not everybody's going to listen. Not everybody's going to jump on board. You'll never have 100% participation in anything. But what we've learned is invest in the people. Invest in them, not your strategies, not your band, not your, but all that stuff is important. I don't want to say it's not, it's important. But if you're revitalizing a church and you don't have the people on board with you, you can't revitalize the church. And so you got to spend a lot of time investing in people. And again, I think that's one of the failures of the church today is we spend less time investing. We spend a lot of time teaching, Elliott. We like to teach. But a good teacher doesn't just say things. A good teacher sees results of what they're teaching. And so the results, I think, of a good pastor, because at some point, right, you asked this question earlier, at what point are you not a church plant anymore? Like when did you ever make the trip? I think that when we become adults, when we become a big church, we're not a church plant anymore. You now have people that's been coming to your church for a couple of years or more. And so they want to get stuck in their traditions. They want to do what they enjoy doing. I think it's human nature, to think about ourselves, put ourselves first. It's human nature. Scripture teaches us a lot to not do that. But you've probably heard this analogy before. But if you take a group picture, and you get the picture back, and you're looking at it on your phone, and it's like, who's the first person that you look for? Yourself. Like you want to see yourself in the picture.
Yeah.
And that's what churches do is, they look at the community and it's like, look at our church. Why aren't people coming to our church? Why don't they want to be a part of our church? And it's like, well, nobody else in the picture knows you're there. You haven't done anything to stand out. You haven't done anything to, and so it's, so church revitalization and church planting is sort of my background. But I currently serve here in Jacksonville. I currently serve as one of the pastors on staff of one of the fastest growing churches in America. So it's a whole nother ride. It's an exciting ride.
So you're a campus pastor, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Is that
yeah?
How many different campuses are there at your church, and
So
how does that?
So I'm at Elevate Life Church here in Jacksonville. Church is 13 years old. It is also an ARC church plant.
Okay.
We currently have 4 campuses. And so uh, I'm at our main campus is considered our broadcast location is at our Oakleaf campus. And so sort of the main hub of where everything happens. Our central staff is located there. It's our largest facility, largest campus. And then I'm at Fleming Island campus. In size, it's our second largest campus in size. It's about 30 minutes away from the Oakleaf campus. And then we have another campus over on the south side of Jacksonville in the Arlington area. And then we just started a campus a year ago out in a rural area called McClenny, just outside of Jacksonville. It's our pastor's hometown. And so he had very much a heart to reach his hometown. So it's about 30 minutes the other direction of our main campus. And so, super, super exciting. The part that I didn't talk about a second ago in our church revitalization was not only did we want to reach a younger generation, but we wanted to look like our community. We didn't want to be very much a segregated church. And so we were very intentional about understanding our community's demographics, psychographics. What does a community really, what do they look like, and how do they think? And so what makes them tick? And so that was very much part of our strategy in our church revitalization. But here at Elevate, our pastor Tim Stayer, that is really very, very much a passion point for him. Is how do we reach the entire community, not a segment of the community? And so, man, the leadership here is incredible in really reaching truly the demographic here. And so, our broadcast location is very, very intent. All of our campuses are very, very intentional of looking like the community that they're in, ethnically, as far as financial, all the different. I mean, we very much look like the community. Our Fleming Island campus is a little bit more middle income, upper middle income, a little more affluent area, and so we've done a very good job here reaching this community here. And again, it is very much a diverse community in age. This community is a little bit older than some of our other areas. But so that's Elliott. Let's be honest. That's why they have me here to reach some of that older demographic. And so, and then the Arlington campus is very much an urban setting, and so we're sort of reaching more of that urban community. Then our McClenny location, and you can just tell by the name, McClenny. It is a rural community. And so, man, I mean, just our campuses are diverse in where they're strategically situated. And so, again, I think that's just another part of what the Church of America needs to embrace today is, man, we have to be intentional about when we look at the picture, what does the community look like, not what do I look like? And so when we can become looking like the community, you're going to do a much better job reaching people for Christ.
So I've actually heard the opposite from a lot of pastors, that when you are planting a church or just pastoring a church in general, you need to have a particular sort of person in mind when you're preaching, and a particular sort of audience in mind that you are trying to get to the church, so you can focus on that group. And people like to be in community with people like them. So
Yeah.
it potentially a church can potentially grow faster if you're focusing on one segment of people.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I would say the I think I think and if you think about this strategically, and I think if you're going to be a great leader, you have to
Hmm.
think strategically. Um, when you're a church plant and you've got a team built, or you're a church revitalization, and you're 75, 100, 150 people,
Hmm.
um, there has to be some common sense that we can't reach everybody, we can't accommodate everybody, we
Hmm.
can't do all the things that a church of 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 can do.
Right.
But I do think that you have to have in your mind, what does the community look like, and what can I do? What ministries can I begin to bring on? What are some of the things that I can do?
Okay.
And so, but culturally, I think one of the things that we get hung up on a lot of
Hmm.
times is ethnicity.
Mm.
That and so there may be some cultural differences in ethnicity, but we all live in the same community.
Yeah.
And so when we all live in the same community, our cultures, some of our background cultures may be different, but our current cultures are a lot the same. And so that's why we choose to live in this community. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do think, in that sense, that you have to look at, what does this community of Fleming Island look like? What does the community in which you're in look like? And I think
Hmm.
where a lot of guys go astray is they come to a city like Jacksonville, or where I was at in middle Georgia, and you've got the little town of Warner Robins that's about 120,000 people. Then you've got the city of Macon that's another 130, 150,000 people. And they go like, how do we reach all these people? No, no, no. What's the and every community is going to look different.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like, okay, so depending on where you're at, your community may be 5 or 6 city blocks, or it could be 10-mile radius.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to figure out what your community is, and what does your community look like, and now go after the people in that community.
Okay.
But I would say, as a strategy,
Mm.
uh, if you're going to build a church uh, long term, which I think is the goal,
Yeah.
how do we reach young families? You know, there's a great appeal to reaching young singles, because they
Mm-hmm.
have more time, they have more flexibility, they can definitely serve more in your church than a young family can. Um, but they don't bring the stability. And so, if you reach an older demographic, they bring a lot of experience and they bring a lot more finances. Um, but they also bring their traditions with them, and they bring their heritage with them, and a lot of that's good. But I think strategically, if you can begin to reach some young families, they'll stick with you for a long time. They're beginning to get their footing under them. They're beginning to get some finances under them. And then if you can really begin to reach into a single young congregation,
Mm-hmm.
culture, community, if you can tap into some colleges, those kind of things, that's and now you, as the key leader and the key leaders in the church, now you get to invest in these, if I could say, impressionable younger audience. Like, and so now you get to become the disciple maker in them. And so you have to kind of figure out what your community looks like in that, and then singularly say, okay, what do we got to do to reach this community? So I would say that's the only difference I would have in that. But there does need to be a singular focus of that community. And
Yeah.
so, uh, even our
Okay.
campuses here at Elevate, it's like, okay, I am tasked with, what do we need to do to reach Fleming Island? Because what we're going to do to reach Fleming Island is going to look a little different than what Arlington or McClenny is going to do to reach their communities.
Mm-hmm.
But our church overall, we do the same things at every campus. Our
Yeah.
worship is the same. Everything's the same.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as we begin to do small groups, as we begin to do some things that's more locally oriented, we begin now to take on the posture of our community and what that community looks like.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my uh, another thing that I get to have my hands in
Hmm.
is what we call our wellness center. So it's called the Wellspring Wellness Center. It came out of the church revitalization that I
Okay.
was a part of, but it is a ministry to families with special needs children, and so it's a really really neat ministry. That's in every community. Uh, there's a fairly large population of families that have special needs children, from everything, from kids on the spectrum of autism and Asperger's and all those kind of things, to
Hmm.
children with physical needs. And so one of the things that we figured out when looking at different communities is these people are in these communities. My wife is a public education teacher, and
Okay.
but she specializes in the field of special needs children. And
Hmm.
so we begin to look at all these different schools
Hmm.
throughout our community, and it was like, man, there's a lot of these families on a percentage basis. 3 to 5, 10% of the school, would be special needs children on
Wow.
some level of the spectrum. Uh, and so then we begin to look at our churches, and it's like, they're not here.
Hmm.
We have a few, but not many. And so as
Hmm.
I begin to talk to other pastors and other church leaders, uh, one of the things that we figured out was, well, you know why they're not here?
Not
We don't
equipped.
have anything to offer them. We're not
Yeah.
equipped to handle them. And so you take a family that has a kid that's very high on the spectrum,
Hmm.
various different abilities and needs. Those families can't come and drop their kid off in your children's ministry because they
Hmm.
have different needs.
Right.
And so we developed a ministry, a 501c3 separate from the church,
Hmm.
that is it's self funding in a sense. It is a 501c3
Okay.
nonprofit, but we
Yes.
do physical therapy, speech pathology. We do different therapies for these children, and so we've set it up where that's billable to insurance, so it helps
Hmm.
fund the ministry. But
Okay.
really, what makes it the nonprofit, the organization, is that we want to come alongside churches and help them reach these families. And so now we can help your church set up uh, a special needs ministry, and
Hmm.
we can even take you through the process of what it is to set up a nonprofit like ours. And so you can bring in physical therapists. A lot of churches have a lot of space that they're not
Hmm.
using during the week,
Yeah.
and so we have taken a couple of different places and helped them rehab their facility uh,
Hmm.
to be able to bring families in uh, with different needs, different physical therapies, occupational. We can do occupational therapy, speech pathology, all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
But now the church begins to build a relationship with these families,
Hmm.
and now these families who couldn't bring their kids, now the church is beginning to develop a volunteer team on Sundays that can be equipped to handle these special needs children, and because there's a uniqueness to every child, but especially when it comes to kids with special needs. And so we can begin to tailor make ministries on Sunday morning to handle these kids that are coming to your church for whatever therapies that they need. So
Yeah.
it's a really really interesting, super interesting ministry.
Yeah. It
So
definitely sounds like it. How does that end up working on a Sunday morning for a family with special needs, bringing a child to church?
so again, it sort of kind of It depends on the size of the church. It depends on the size, the amount of volunteers that you have.
Sure.
One of the things here at Elevate that we do, and we sort of kind of focus it on each particular campus, but we call it e-buddies here. But it's basically a partnership kind of a deal. And
Mm-hmm.
so depending on the ability of the child, so we do an intake during the week.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get with that family and they say, hey, we're going to bring our kid on Sunday. And so we begin to figure out what needs they have. And so based on that, we can let our volunteers know the buddy that's going to be partnered with this special needs child on
Mm-hmm.
Sunday. And a lot of times it's a teenager that becomes the buddy,
Yeah.
16 or 15 or over. And
Oh,
and so now they just kind of partner with them. They can go into our children's ministry worship service that we do, and a couple of other churches do it very, very similar to this as well. And
mm-hmm.
and so they can go in. But now, when that kid begins to show some aggression, begins to show different aspects of, hey, and so we can pull them out. And so we help churches figure out how to set up sensory rooms, and you can do that at pretty low cost.
Yeah.
But it's a room that's just set aside that has like a crash pad that the kid can lay on, or maybe a swing that they can sit and rock in and move in.
Mm-hmm.
We have little lava lamp, just some things that sort of help calm and bring that child down.
Hmm.
But now some kids may be more on a physical spectrum than a mental emotional spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And so, depending on what the abilities that you have, with the volunteers that you have, with the finances that you have to be able to fund a ministry, you can do different things. One of the things that we, just from a liability standpoint, is we really don't deal with medical issues.
Okay.
And so, it gets different when you got to start with handling kids with feeding tubes and different things. So we try to stay away from medical issues on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then on the nonprofit, on the structure side of it during the week,
Mm-hmm.
we have a little bit more flexibility with some of that, because we have hired fully trained, educated physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech pathologists. These are people that work in the medical field. So
Okay.
it's a separate business, separate. It's not a business, separate organization, but
Yeah.
it's partnered with the church to be able to bring these families in. So
Okay.
yeah,
So,
yeah, very.
if a church wanted to get started with that, how much time and like cost would go into that?
So you can set up like a sensory room,
Mm-hmm.
um, $1,000, maybe if that, depending on what you want to put in there. Obviously, you can spend up to $10,000.
Okay.
You can spend more than that, I guess. But we do things like a lot of church facilities, depending on the lighting that you have. But if you can change the mode of lighting that's in a room, uh, in our campuses here at Elevate, one of the things that we did was we have fluorescent lights in the ceiling, and a fluorescent light has a bit of a flicker to it, and it can help it can have part of a sensory overload. And so there's some you can put fabric over the lights, and it kind of darkens the room a little bit depending on the fabric that you have, but it holds
Mhm.
back some of that. You can change those lights out to an LED bulb, instead of the old fluorescent bulb. You could
Mm.
put floor lamps in. Again, all those things are fairly low cost. You could buy a
Mm.
crash pad, like a legit crash pad, for a couple $100. Um,
Okay.
you can buy a swing that is, they're a couple of $1,000. What you have to be careful of is sort of some of the safety regulations and some of those, because a swing that a regular child could get in, a child with special needs couldn't, and be able to get them out of. And so there's some things, that you just have to kind of pay attention to, but you can do it pretty low cost, and you don't have to have all the bells and whistles in there, and then build on that over time. But we can definitely help. Churches want to reach out to us, we can definitely help with that.
That's really cool. Yeah. Okay. And then you have one other ministry that you do on top of all that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You consult with churches as well. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. So all that sort of combined. But yeah. So I do I just have so there's a well-known author, Dr. Tom Rainer, and so Dr. Rainer has been a mentor of mine over the years, and so he does church consulting, and so I've been trained by him on church consulting, and so we can kind of come in and help churches. Everything from, if you want to start a wellness center, you can name it whatever you want. That's what we named ours, to reach special needs kids. If you want to do church revitalization, church planting, whatever it is that God's calling you to. And so we can kind of come in and help gather data, on your community, demographic, psychographic studies of your community, where you're at. What does that community look like? What do you need to focus in on? And then we can begin to meet with your team, and again, sort of begin to work through all the different demographics of your community. And so as we begin to gather data, and then we just begin to gather what your team looks like. And I can't stress this enough. Your church is going to grow at the ability of your team. And so, depending on their experience, depending on their passion, depending on their aggressiveness, all those things, and so, not everybody's a great leader, but I think the leaders can be taught. And so, some of that really is, depending upon your leaders, but we can help you with that as well. But so anyway, so we come in and we gather information about your church, information about you as the key leader, about the key leaders on your team. And then we try to spend some time, obviously in the world that we live in today. Most of that is done over Zoom. We can do some in-person stuff. But again, and we flex all this based on the amount of money that you have, to spend on that. And we can help you at every different level. And then once we sort of gather all this information, then we can synthesize it together and basically give you some recommendations, some remedies, all that kind of stuff. So.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's so much information.
I get to do. It is.
Yeah.
So to de-information all that, to de-escalate it a little bit, here's the simple answer. We've been doing this for a long time. So we've got church planting background. We've got church revitalization background. I get the privilege of serving one of the fastest growing churches, and we were named the 7th fastest growing church in America this past year. And so, anyway, I've got some experience. And so anything that we can do to help you with that, reach out to us and we can definitely help.
So how'd you get to know Tom Rainier?
Just different relationships, coming out of some of the Baptist background. Dr. Rainer used to be part of was the CEO of Lifeway, and now he has a ministry. Man, to give a shout out to that. But he's just doing some incredible stuff today. And so one of the things that he's doing is training young leaders. And so, but basically got hooked up with him just from different people in my realm. And so he became a mentor to me. Tremendously intelligent guy. But man, what a great writer, and what a great impact he's had on churches today. He's written like 70 books at this point now or something.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
know I've read like 5 or 6 of them and watched a lot of his podcasts.
Yeah. He's got a great podcast. He's got two great podcasts out right now. Some great stuff.
Okay, so getting towards the end here, what sort of problems do you see in the churches you consult with, and just like the church in general today?
So, if I could just for your entire audience, please don't hate me when I say this, but this is just, if I can just give the most real, raw, authentic answer to what is one of the biggest challenges I see with churches today. It's the pastors. And they're not bad. They're not bad. It's not like this is an insult to pastors. I think a lot of guys come into churches. They come into ministry. They want to be a pastor because they love Jesus and they love people. But leading people, as Jesus found out, is difficult. Leading people is difficult. You're not going to be loved by everybody, but you're also not going to be hated by everybody. And so, you have to lead. And I think sometimes pastors just need someone to come alongside them and encourage them and help point them in the right direction, or even affirm that, you're headed in the right direction. Because a lot of times what we do is we surround ourselves, and again, not inappropriately, but we surround ourselves with just the people in our church. And so I have yet to meet a pastor. I have met thousands of pastors. I have yet to meet one that didn't want to grow, that didn't want his church to grow, that didn't want to reach people. Every pastor I've ever met wants to do that. But the church members, they're coming, again, the picture. Like when I look at my church, I'm looking at myself in the picture first, and how do I fit into this? So what great pastors do, what great leaders do, is they lead people to look at the full picture, not at themselves. But when you do that, you're going to have conflict, and to be able to have healthy conflict in a church seems like an oxymoron to people. But we can, in fact, have healthy conflict. We don't have to agree on everything, but we do have to agree on God's calling. We have to agree on the vision that God's given our church. Where are we headed? What's the plan? How are we going to get there? We may vary on some of those things. But if we say, hey, I want to reach this community for Jesus, and we can agree on that, and I'll probably get some hate mail for this, but it's okay. I don't think that we have to all line up 100% theologically the same. But if we can believe that Jesus died, he came, virgin birth, he came, lived a perfect sinless life, died on the cross for us, rose again on the third day, ascended and is now seated at the right hand of the Father. He died for our sins. Man, if we can agree on Jesus, we can do ministry together. But man, guys want to argue over Calvinism and Reformed and non-Reformed and look, we can differ on some of those things, and it's okay. But if we can agree on Jesus, man, let's go reach people for Jesus. And then so now once they're in our congregation, they're coming, we can teach them what we believe.
Right.
But we can, and so I think sometimes we just kind of get a little off track, if you will, because we're focused on some of the things that are very, very dear to us, but may not be dear to someone else. But if we can't ever get them under our discipleship, covering, then we don't get to teach them. And so, but I think, and I mean that sort of as a play on words, but I do think that pastors have got to lead, and they have to lead well. And sometimes when they're only surrounded by the people that they're trying to lead, they get consumed by that. And
Yeah.
so it's great. It's great to find a Tom Rayner or find a pastor that's in your community that's leading a church different than yours, or a church that's they may have surpassed you in number, or they may have surpassed you, but find somebody that you can lead up to and have them invest in you. And so I think that's one of the greatest things is pastors get lonely, they get tired, they get, they're giving out, they're preaching. Some pastors that I know are preaching one message on Sunday morning, a different message on Sunday night. They're teaching something different on Wednesday. And it's like, man, you're giving out a lot. Find somebody else that can invest in you. And so when you can do that, you can lead at a different level.
Okay. Last couple questions for you here.
Yeah.
Is there any books that you recommend? Because you've done so many different things, and I think it might be interesting to see if you have any recommendations out there.
Yeah. One of the books that's always just sort of a go-to for me, it's not a leadership book, but How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. There's several updates to that now. Stewart and Fee wrote that, I think, back in the 90s. But it's been updated several times. But it teaches you some basic hermeneutics, basic exegesis. I know that's some words that not, but it basically teaches you some fundamental tools of how to really study the Scripture. There's even a couple of chapters in there that deal with different Bible translations and how to find the Bible translation that's best for you. But the reason I recommend that book, if you haven't read it, I think it's a great read for anybody. And then it teaches you the different genres. How do we study the different genres of Scripture? But man, church leaders, for small group leaders, for Sunday school teachers, for pastors to use as a teaching aid in their church. And so take your Sunday school class through it, take your small group through it. I think pastors, can teach from it. But it's a great tool on how to study the Bible, how to read the Bible for all it's worth. It's just one of the, I think it's just one of the, it's a great book. Anything by John MacArthur. Not John MacArthur, John on leadership. But any kind of leadership books. A book that I'm taking my staff through right now, and so I've read it, and liked it enough that I'm taking my staff through it. Is How to Lead When You're Not in Charge, and so by Clay Scroggins, and so it's a great book in the sense that if you think about this, even if you're the senior pastor of a church, or if you're the campus pastor like me of a church, even the senior pastor, the lead pastor, for the most part, if it's a church that is growing and doing well, a biblical model church, there's going to be, whatever you call them, there's going to be deacons, elders, board of trustees, whatever you call that outside body. But pastors need that around them. And so they may be in charge, but they're not totally in charge, because they can be overridden at some point. You need to have that overriding authority in your life. And then guys like me, if you're a campus pastor, if you're a youth pastor, if you're a education, a worship leader, whatever that may be, the missionary on whatever that is. But how do you lead, and how do you lead well? And the answer is influence. Like, you do that through influence. But How to Lead When You're Not in Charge, I think it's a great book that I'm going through right now.
And what do you see as being next for you? You've got all these different ministries. What are they leading towards?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I don't know. I'm 50 now, and
Yeah.
so the first part of my ministry has been super exciting,
Mhm.
and so I really plan for the second part to be just as exciting, if not more. But really, I've made the transition from being the key leader in those organizations to
Mhm.
really being more of a support to be able to lend influence together. That's why I love doing the wellness center. Um, we have some folks on hand that lead that ministry on the day to day. I
Mhm.
do more of the consulting for that, how to help churches set that up. Beth Bryan, who is our physical therapist on staff, but she's the one
Mhm.
who leads that ministry day to day. And so Pastor Tim Stair obviously leads our ministry here very, very well. I lead our Fleming Island campus on a day to day, if you will. But I've got a lot of
Yes.
flexibility to be able to do the church consulting work, do the wellness center work. And so really I see my days of today and the future really of helping just use my influence and experience coaching different guys.
Yeah. All right. Well, final question before I let you go, um, is if people want to reach out to you for like consulting, learning about starting wellness centers, anything like that, where do they reach you at?
Probably the easiest thing is my website is chucklewis.org.
Okay.
That's the easiest thing. Just you can go there and then you can kind of find everything else from there. But you can find me at Pastor Chuck Lewis on Instagram, or you can find me at Chuck Lewis on Facebook. So, but it's easiest if you just go to chucklewis.org. And
Okay.
so that's kind of the landing page for our church consulting.
Yeah.
So we can go from there. So, but yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, for you or for anybody else, don't hesitate, reach out,
Hmm.
talk is free. And
Yes.
so it's what I tell guys all the time, man, reach out to people. Don't be afraid to ask questions, seek help where you can get it, and so uh, we'll try and point you in the right direction anyway. So
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chuck, for coming on the podcast. And
yeah, man, thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed it.